Pentagon, 1952. This is a Pentagon office worker, page 152, case 1 in the book. Now, in this case, this office worker, she got down what we believe to be the lower basement at the Pentagon. And it's kind of dark, it's dusty, it's kind of moldy. She goes through these double doors that are off limits, and now she's in this very dark room. There's some cardboard boxes off to the right. She kind of does a 180-degree turn, and what does she see? She sees a pickled ET body and a large glass jar. Within 10 seconds, she feels this hand on her elbow, and it's an MP telling her to get out of here immediately. She was pulled out of here, by force. But she did see a pickled ET body in a glass jar. She did see it. Something that may have looked like this.
Welcome back. I'm here with Michael Schratt. Michael, welcome, my friend.
Good to be with you.
Okay, so before we get started, can you just give the audience, if they're not familiar with your work, kind of who you are and what you do? And you don't need to answer why you're in the town of Harvard Library, which, by the way, is where my wife grew up and is from. So I'm very familiar with where Michael is right now, which is another random synchronicity. But go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'm a private pilot and military aerospace historian. The primary focus of my research deals with classified aircraft within the military-industrial complex. And that has kind of bled over to this topic of UFO crash retrievals. Leonard Stringfield was really the originator. He coined the term UFO crash retrieval. He wrote a very thick volume that we're going to get into, and that's what this presentation is all about, making these cases come alive through the use of drawings, illustrations, sketches, and to make it really come alive. That's the whole thrust of the presentation.
All right, Michael. Again, it's a pleasure to have you, and let's get started.
Okay, so bottom line is this presentation is called Retrievals of the Third Kind. Cosmic crashes, corpses, and cover-ups. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And basically, it's really the holy grail of UFO research. And why is that the case? Why is that the case? Because it's the UFO crash retrievals that contain the bodies, the debris, and the craft. That is what it's going to take to move this entire field forward. We've been in this field for 80 years now. And people have come and gone, and they have still not cracked the cosmic Watergate. And the reason why is we have not been able to get to the physical evidence. We don't need any more CE1 cases. We don't need any more lights in the sky cases. We've got thousands of those in NICAP, UFOs, MUFON archives. We don't need any more. What we need now are the actual bodies, the actual craft, the actual debris. That's what's really going to take to move this to the next level. That's what we want to talk about here. A couple of quick announcements here, a couple of quick bullet items here. The content of each case highlighted in this presentation has remained intact per the description of the original source. Number 2, the identity of first-hand sources will be protected per Leonard Stringfield's original agreement with his military contacts. Number 3, the visual aids used in this presentation are computer-generated forensic composite illustrations and sketches which originated from the specific details provided by Leonard's sources. Source material for everything covered in this presentation is as follows here. So you've got 3-star U.S. Air Force generals, U.S. Air Force fighter pilots, astronauts, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, neurosurgeons, pathologists, theoretical physicists, and mathematicians, U.S. Army officers, U.S. Navy officers, military police, high-level Pentagon officials, top military brass, scientists, and engineers who worked at Wright Patterson Air Force Base and other government facilities. So bottom line is, these are the first-hand military sources where Leonard got his information from. These are the actual sources here. A couple of quick quotes. Number 1, UFO crash retrievals can't be real because if they were, I would have read about in a local newspaper. That's the general public. Number 2, there are not now, nor ever have been, any extraterrestrial visitors or equipment on Wright Patterson Air Force Base. So that is the official Air Force press release policy as of July 1980. So it's really all of Leonard Stringfield's witnesses against the United States Air Force. So that's kind of the fight we're up against here. This is Leonard Stringfield here. He's the man of the hour. He's the one who coined the term UFO crash retrieval. So credit goes to Leonard for doing this very early, important work. And we'll just do a couple of things about his bio here. Born 1920, he grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. By the time he graduated from high school in 1939, he had already memorized the entire dictionary. So this guy was a smart person here. He joined the military as soon as he heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. After the war, he was employed by a chemical company in Ohio and retired after 30 years. He wrote 2 books, Inside Saucer Post 3-0 back in 1957. Second book was Situation Red, the UFO Siege, back in 1977.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Bain Books at bain.com.
The next bullet item is what we want to drill down on here tonight. His lecture on UFO crash retrievals at the 1979 MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, caused an international sensation for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was really the first time people had ever thought of this concept that bodies could be recovered, craft could be recovered by the U.S. government, and they're being kept away in an underground bunker somewhere at the Pentagon. Back in this time frame, this was still kind of early concepts here. And number two, when he delivered this paper at the MUFON Symposium that highlighted 12 of his firsthand witnesses, he told their accounts, and he preserved an important part of our national history. However, he had to keep their names under wraps. And so he did receive some pushback here because no one could independently verify any of this. He had to just take it on their word. And so there was some pushback here. So I think it's important that we mention that. He passed away in 1994. So it's been so long now. And a lot of these witnesses are long since gone. This is what I kind of say is this is the final curtain call on disclosure. And if we don't track down these legacy witnesses and get to their supervisors who can possibly get us to the bodies and the craft, then we're not going to know about this. There's going to be another 80 years go by, and we'll completely lose all our history. That's why it's imperative now that we track down these legacy witnesses here.
Presumably these things are still happening, right? So there might be new witnesses.
That's true. We have new witnesses as well. That's true. This is true. Cincinnati Enquirer, July 19th, 1993. Author continues quest for truth about UFOs. Thought that was interesting. Next one. Leonard maintained a collection of 22 bank boxes of original correspondence, letters, drawings, audio tapes, testimony from his sources. These witnesses should be located and their testimony should be presented before Congress. Yeah. So he really did have the bombshell information here within 22 bank boxes. Now, this was back in 91. Those things existed. Now, I have reason to believe that a lot of this material was thrown out. All of the original witnesses, the names, their contact information, phone number, addresses, the kind of information we need desperately right now, it could be all gone. All we have left is his legacy and his book that includes the accounts of these witnesses, but it didn't have any drawings. And so that's why I want to go to this.
So where's the collection now? Like, where did all these boxes end up?
No one knows.
Okay.
I talked to a family member, and he told me that what Leonard wanted published, he had published in his multiple status reports. The rest of the material, we believe, might have been thrown out. All of the very important material, but at least we have this document. Now, this is his book that has all of his status reports in one volume. So UFO crash retrievals, the complete investigations, 1978 to 1994. I mean, and this is something that if you're really interested in crash retrievals, like how the bodies were retrieved, what the pathologist report said, exactly how many 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboys were used to ship these craft to Wright Patterson Air Force Base. All of the intricate details on these crash retrievals is in this book. So if anyone's interested in getting the real inside story, this is something you have to have. And I bring this up because about 3 years ago, I was going through this book very carefully with a fine-tooth comb. And, what you'll see when you look at this is that there's no drawings, there's no illustrations, there's really no sketches, there's no visual aids almost of any kind at all. So I thought someone needs to go through this book very carefully, pick out the most mission-critical cases, and then commit those to a refined pencil drawing, and then commission that into a full-color rendering. And so that's what I've been doing the last 3 years here, is trying to make these cases come alive.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
And then I kind of like to go to this here. Would you go to Las Vegas if you knew the odds were 119 to 1 in your favor? So if you went to a roulette wheel in Vegas and you had 120 spaces and you put down a bet on 119 of those and you spun that wheel, you're literally going to win every time. And that's where we are right now. It's 119 to 1 in our favor. All we need is for one of these to be authentic, and the whole concept of UFO crash retrievals non-existence falls apart completely. So the Air Force can say whatever they want. They can come out and say that UFOs didn't exist prior to 2004 with the Nimitz UAP case, with the Tic Tac and the FA-18 Super Hornet. They can say all they want. But these legacy witnesses go back to the 50s, they go back to the 60s, they go back to the 40s. And if you take it even further back to 1933 in Italy, where they had a crash retrieval, now we're way beyond what the Air Force is claiming didn't exist. So we will not let these legacy witnesses die in vain. We're going to keep their stories alive here. I want to give credit to my good friend Rudy Gardet, who's the artist who did the sketches, and we can begin here. This is 1942. This is a UFO crash retrieval. Now, this thing came down at a base north of Georgia. Even Leonard didn't know where this thing actually came down. This is page 319 in the book. And so as we go through, I'm going to give you the page number, I'm going to give you the case number, so you can verify these and investigate it on your own here for anyone who wants to follow along. So this thing was about 15 feet in diameter. It was 10 feet tall. It had 3 levels. The upper level had a control panel with what looked like buttons and dials and a display screen. Below that, which was actually the mid deck, there were 4 what looked like bar stools that were posed and positioned in back of a large wraparound window. On the bottom section, there was an entryway hatch. But in the report, it said that 4 crew members were taken alive. They were about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. And then they said in the report that there was hieroglyphic type lettering written on the inside walls of the craft itself and on the bottom exterior wrapped around the outer circumference. And this is back in 42. So this is long prior to Roswell. We're years prior to Roswell here. I'm going to do a blow up to give people an idea of what these hieroglyphic letterings may have looked like back in 42. I will go to the next one. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946. Tex Martin was a 6-year-old boy at the time. This is page 242, 243 in the book. Now, he was rewarded because of his good grades that he got at school. So he joined his father, who worked at the base, and I believe it may have been this complex here. This is complex number 4. We'll go to the next slide here. And his location was basically adjoining this base, very close to it. And there was a janitor that asked if this young boy wanted to have a soda pop. And so he said, yes, I'd like to have a soda pop. So he hands this primary witness, who was only 6 years old at the time, back in 46, he hands this soda pop to this young boy. And I'm going to go to the next drawing here. Here's Rudy's very rough sketches. We're planning all this out here. And there was this adjoining doorway that opened up, and this little boy looks inside. And what did he see? Here's the rough sketch here. He sees 2 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboys with tarp debris, with chains covering the tarps. There were military personnel. There was a Jeep in there. And then kind of off to the right, over to the far end of the hangar, there was what looked like a off-white disc-shaped craft that had 2 rings wrapped around the outer circumference. It was sitting on tripod landing gear legs. And then he said, Laying next to the disc-shaped craft on the floor were approximately three what appeared to be ET bodies on gurneys, and they were wearing one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. That's what he saw from his perspective. So I'm going to go to the next drawing. And so we've reversed the perspective now, and you can see him looking through the doorway as we're roughing out the scene here. And let me go to the refined drawing, and now you can kind of see what this thing actually looked like, and you can see our witness in the back peering through this door. And this is what this witness is telling us here. You see the two 18-wheeler tractor trailers. You've got the disc-shaped craft. This thing was about 20 feet in diameter. It had two bands wrapped around the outer circumference. So if we take everything we got from the Leonard Stringfield report, based on what the primary eyewitness told us, and we link that up with Rudy's refined drawing, and let's go to the full color rendering. And this is what we came up with the full color rendering, just to make this actually come alive. Now, back in 46, it was known as Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. It
Right.
had but not become Wright Patterson Air Force Base until 1947. So let's go to the next presentation here. This is Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946. The primary eyewitness was a private. He worked in records management. And this is from Space, The Final Frontier, page 59 by Clark McClellan. I want to hit you with the cover of the book. Anyone who's interested, you can get the account within this book. And so this private records management, he goes into one of the hangars at Wright Patterson, or Wright Field at the time, and he notices that his friend is at this facility. So he's basically goes into this hangar, and his friend says, you know what, I got something I want to show you. So he leads him into the hangar, and he shows him this disc-shaped craft. This is the original sketch from the primary eyewitness. Now, this thing was highly polished, mirror reflective, 15 feet in diameter, 7 feet tall, and it has a series of rectangular porthole windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. It came in from a railroad flat car from Arkansas. It made it all the way to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Now, I want to stress, this thing had no seams, no rivets, no visible means of propulsion. There were no socket head cap screws. There were no hex head cap screws. There was a central column that ran from the bottom of the craft all the way up toward the upper section. And this is the AutoCAD drawing here. If you look on the right-hand side of this drawing, I peeled back the skin, showing you this 3-foot diameter central column that went all the way to the top. Now, I want to mention something that's very important that is kind of written through the tapestry of all these legacy UFO crash retrieval cases. If you look on the second window to the left of center, actually the one right over to the left here, there's a red dot. Now that red dot is the attempted point of entry where these lab coat technicians were desperately trying to get in with a diamond tip drill bit. I've got 3 separate cases of these diamond tip drill bits that they're trying to get into these crafts. So this is something that repeats itself multiple times. Now, this was my first very rough illustration of what this craft looked like. I mean, highly polished, mirror reflective. And we'll go to the next one. Now, this is Joseph Race, somewhat more cleaned up drawing and a little bit better of a rendering. Again, we've pulled back the skin, and now you can see this 18-inch diameter central column here. We'll go to the next one. Now, when he got there, he said that there was a toolbox just in the foreground of the craft itself. Off to the left of the toolbox was an electric drill with a diamond tip drill bit, and then sitting on the floor, folded up next to this craft, was this tarp. So there were teams of lab coat technicians that were changing shift, desperately trying to get into this craft. So if we take everything from the primary eyewitness, the 3-page report, and then we hook it up with Rudy's drawing, let's go to the full color rendering. And now you can see what this looks like, making this case come alive and preserving an important part of our national history. And this is what these witnesses are telling us here. Let's go to the next one. This is Papagos Indian Reservation, west of Globe, Arizona, January 1947, north of Superstition Mountains. The primary eyewitness in this case worked in the U.S. Navy during World War II. And this is page 93, case A10 in the book. And we'll go to Rudy's drawing here. So what happened is we have 2 of the primary eyewitnesses were driving down a deserted, unimproved road. And they're stopped by 2 MPs that are armed. And they're told, you're not supposed to be here. Get out of here immediately. But it was already too late. because they got to this whole retrieval scene in the midst of it actually going on. When they looked off to the left, about another 100 feet down this road, they saw about a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that had augured in at a 40-degree angle. It had approximately 18 feet tall, had a low-rise dome on top. There was a series of 2 rings wrapped around the outer circumference, and then what looked like indented windows between those rings. And this is what this witness is telling us here. We'll go to the full color rendering, and now you can see this case came alive. And so we're not even at the Roswell timeline yet, and we're about 3 to 4 cases in now. Let's go to the next slide. This is White Sands Missile Range, July 4th, 1947. So we're finally at this Roswell timeline now. Technical Sergeant, U.S. Army Air Force, that's the primary eyewitness. This is UFO Crash Retrievals, page 196 in the book. This happened at night, and when the team got to where this thing came down, this thing was 150 feet in diameter. It had a dome on the top. And I want to mention very quickly that this whole entire case was excruciatingly well lit. They had light-alls, they had mobile light units, they had spotlights, they had searchlights focused on this craft. They had people walking around this craft with Geiger counters. They had people taking still camera photographs of this. They had motion picture film reels going on of this thing. This entire operation was excruciatingly well documented. I'm going to go to the full color rendering here. It shows you the entire operation. We've got the mobile lights shining down on the craft. And if I go to the next slide, this is the actionable item. Since still photography and motion picture film was recorded of this event, senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should track down and utilize this evidence for future public hearings. This should have happened decades ago. But the problem we're running into is that these senators and congressmen, they don't have a need to know, and they haven't been read into these programs, so they're not going to get to this information. That's the problem we're running into here. Let's go to the next slide. UFO crash retrieval, 1947, seen at a warehouse at Berkeley University, of all places. This is at Berkeley University. Now, we do have the name of the primary eyewitness. This is Albert Bruce Collins, deceased. He was a metallurgical engineer. This is page 197 in the book. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And so here you see him wearing his white lab coat with his clipboard. And this 18-wheeler backs into the warehouse at Berkeley University. And he described this thing literally as a cracked egg. It was 30 feet across, 15 feet high. He was looking in the hull breech of this craft, and he noticed that there was a composite panel on the forward section of the craft. There was another composite panel that wrapped around the outer circumference of an interior 3-foot diameter central core that looked like the egg yolk, a part of this whole thing. Now, he also mentioned that there was a hull breach on the lower right-hand side of the craft with shrapnel coming out. So we believe that there was an interior implosion, and then this thing was brought to Berkeley University. I'm going to go to the full color rendering, and now you can kind of see this case really comes alive as they're backing this thing in here. So at one time, back in 47 timeline, this craft was there. Now, I don't know if it's still there now, but back at that time, this craft was there. Let's go to the next one. This is Carrot Patch, Salinas, California, July, August 1947. This was seen by 2 19-year-old workers. Now, when they got there the morning after this event happened, the foreman the night before noticed that this thing came down. So when these 2 19-year-old boys got to work the next morning, they were alerted by the foreman. I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is the original sketch within the Stringfield dictation notes. It wasn't a big craft, about 9 feet in diameter, 4 feet tall. It had a flat top. There were a double row of indented windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. I'm going to go to the next slide here. And here you see X marks the spot. So if you look on the upper left, you've got Monterey. And then over to where the X is, you've got Gonzales, and then X marks the spot. So technically, we could get within plus or minus, I'd say, 1/8 of a mile where this thing.
It's like right off Highway 101.
Yeah, it's off. That's exactly correct.
Oh my God!
So I mean, if we could get there back at that time frame, we could narrow down where this thing was at, and we could actually see this whole operation. So these two 19-year-old boys, they go up to this thing, and this is my first SolidWorks rendering of what this thing looks like. I'm not a really sophisticated looking craft. And this was the first SolidWorks rendering, very early sketches here. But this is Rudy's refined drawing, gives you an idea. Now, one of the boys walked up to this thing, and he had enough guts, he actually kicked this thing with his boot. So he made contact with it. Within 5 minutes of these two 19-year-old boys getting up close to this thing, there was a convoy of military vehicles that got on the scene. The two boys were told to vacate the area immediately. They left, and then they watched as military personnel manhandled this thing up onto the trailer, covered it with a tarp, and got it out of there very quickly. So this is a retrieval operation that they actually got to see here. And then this is Joel Christopher Payne's illustration based on Rudy's drawing to make this case come alive. And this is, again, what these witnesses are reporting here. Now, next one. C-119 flying boxcar, Sierra Madre Valley, Mexico, prior to 1951. So this is somewhere around the 1948 timeframe. Page 32 in the book. So if anyone wants to follow along, that's where I'm getting the information as the reference and source. This is an engineer who worked in highway construction. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this is an important slide because this slide gauges the diameter of the craft itself. We know that the craft cannot be any more than 9 feet in diameter because the inside cargo bay walls of the C-119 flying boxcar are 9 feet 10 inches. That allows 5 inches of clearance on either side. By default, this craft cannot be any more than 9 feet across. So we know that for sure. So let's go to the next slide. Here's Rudy's drawing of them kind of hoisting the craft on an inclined plane into the back clamshell cargo bay doors of the C-119. And this construction engineer is assisting the United States military in this whole operation. We'll go to the full color rendering by Joseph Wraith here. And now you can see them bringing this craft into the back of the cargo bay. I'm going to go to the next slide. This shows you a little bit of a blow up now. And this is early on. This is 48 timeline. I'll go to the next slide that shows you the two bodies. Now, the two bodies were absolutely very small. They were burned. And in this report, it said when the primary eyewitness touched the face of one of these bodies, its skin came off on his hand. So they were in very bad shape, very poor. The skin actually came out on his fingers. So this is all back in 1948. All right, next one. Naval Air Station.
That's Moffett Field. Right,
Yeah,
that's Moffett Field. Yeah.
You may have been in this hangar. Have you been in this hangar?
No, but I've seen it. I used to work in Mountain View, so I'm very aware of it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, you can drive by it. I've actually been in this hangar. This hangar is so large, it has its own weather. It actually has its own weather. It's that large. So this is 1950. This is a radar operator, case B5, page 57 in the book. And the primary eyewitness, he went through a double door, got inside this hangar when he wasn't supposed to. And when he got in, he saw a absolutely massive 100-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. There was an MP there. This thing had a low-rise dome. There was a series of porthole windows wrapped around the outer circumference, and he was challenged by this guard and told to vacate the area immediately. But what he told his mother later on, many years later, is very interesting. He said, quote, "It was certainly no aircraft of ours," was his opinion. This is coming from this radar operator. Very interesting case. Let's go on to this one. This is hundreds at Farmington report large force of flying saucers. This is Albuquerque Journal, March 18th, 1950. So this is like this early timeline here. Hundreds of these things reported at Farmington. Why is that important? Because during the early 1950s, there was a standing order by the Air Force to our pilots, and this is Cincinnati Enquirer, July 29th, 1952. Shoot saucers down, jet pilots so ordered, and 24-hour alert. I'm going to go to the next one here. We'll rip through a couple of these. Jet keeps 24-hour alert for saucers. Pilots ordered to down objects if they don't land. On the saucer trail, pilots told shoot them down. Jets on 24-hour alert to shoot down saucers, okay? And this is the aircraft that they were using to attempt these intercepts. It was the F-94 Starfire. So if I go to the next slide here, off to the left is the picture of the Starfire with the rocket flaps in the closed position. And you can see that at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Arizona. Now, off to the right, if you go to Dayton, Ohio, at the Air Force Museum, same aircraft, but now the rocket flaps are in the retracted position so that you can actually see all the rocket tubes, just to get an idea of what this thing actually looks like. Here's Rudy's drawing of one of these attempted intercepts, and this one out. And they have gun camera footage of these things. And that's what I want to talk about next here. This is a letter that was written to Leonard Stringfield back in 1979. This is from a woman called Mildred Bissell, and I'm just kind of going to read this here. I think it's very important. Here's what she says. I heard you speak at this MUFON symposium in Dayton last year, and I'm interested in your research on retrievals of the third kind. I gave a talk at a local library last week, and in the discussion period following, a fellow told me that when he was a gunner in the Air Force, he had emptied his guns on a UFO and had taken pictures with his gun camera that clearly showed the shells exploding against the side of the craft. He said the camera was taken off the wing of his plane when it landed, and the pictures developed. At 2 a.m., a couple of military policemen came and got him out of bed and took him to the base auditorium. They ran the 17 seconds of movie of the UFO over and over and questioned him and two other crew members until 10 a.m. He was warned never to tell anyone what had happened. He said he had a wife and family, a good job, and a lot to lose. He seemed afraid of the CIA and wouldn't even give me his name. So here you've got this personnel pilot. He's unloading an entire magazine of shells on this thing. It hits the craft. They got it all on gun camera. And so he was told not to talk about this. And you know that this is repeated throughout the generation. So they've got gun camera footage from World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, the Gulf War, and any other conflict. They've got warehouses full of this gun camera footage. This is the kind of footage that could be sequestered, could be brought into open congressional hearings in Washington, D.C. for all the world to see. And then we would finally move this whole field forward, but it hasn't happened.
Does film rot? Is that an issue?
If it's maintained in a temperature-controlled place, it can stay, yes. The National Archives has stuff that goes back for, probably well over 100 years, and they still have footage. So, yeah, I mean, if they preserve it in a temperature-controlled environment, it can stay, definitely, for sure. Let's go to the next slide here. Classified Materials Library at an unknown U.S. Air Force base. Primary eyewitness was a former military officer. This is page 212, 213 in the book. So he had the proper security clearance to be there. And he opens up one of these file cabinets. He pulls out a manila folder, and he sees an 8x10 glossy black and white photograph of a 36-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. There was a report in there, and there was mention of at least one body recovered. And in the report, it said that this craft had a pencil-sized hole in one of these porthole windows. This thing was about 36 feet in diameter. Now, these are the kind of the bullet items associated with this case. Number one, military officer had the correct security clearance, which gave him access to a classified materials library. Number two, report seen by witness made reference to crashes and that bodies were recovered. Number three, in addition, diamond tip drill bits and acetylene torches were used to gain access to the interior, and that tracks with a case I got in 63. Number four, eventually technicians were able to gain access to the interior of the craft by way of a small entry hatch. The report said, referring to the door, that it was, quote, almost as if the material of the craft liquefied and then solidified again. So now we're talking about this liquid metal like in T2, where the seams are so fully integrated into the craft you cannot see the seams at all. That's what we're talking about here. This is what they're talking about, like a liquid metal type of procedure here. Next one, Pentagon, 1952. This is a Pentagon office worker, page 152, case one in the book. Now, in this case, this office worker, she got down what we believe to be the lower basement at the Pentagon. And it's kind of dark, it's dusty, it's kind of moldy. She goes through these double doors that are off limits. And now she's in this very dark room There's some cardboard boxes off to the right. She kind of does a 180-degree turn, and what does she see? She sees a pickled ET body and a large glass jar. Within 10 seconds, she feels this hand on her elbow, and it's an MP telling her to get out of here immediately. She was pulled out of here, by force, but she did see a pickled ET body in a glass jar. She did see it. Something that may have looked like this by Joseph Wright. So I want to give him credit. So this is something that, as we continue on here, these are just military personnel, people who worked at the Pentagon. A lot of these witnesses, they have nothing to gain by this. I don't think they're lying to us here. Next one. This is Dutton, Montana, 1953. Cecil Tenney is a civilian. We have his name. Page 16 in the book. So he's driving down this road in Montana. And what does he see? He sees a 120-foot long cigar-shaped craft tipped up at a 45-degree angle. It's belching out smoke and flames. It's like trying to keep itself airborne, but it's having a very hard time doing this. The oncoming traffic, he notices that their tailpipes are caught on fire. He's watching all this. He goes about another mile down the road. He gets out of his truck. He goes into a bar and he files a report with the bar owner, and then he leaves. 5 minutes later, a police officer comes in and files another report. And the bartender tells the police officer that, hey, I just had a guy come in here 5 minutes earlier and he described the exact same thing that you're just talking about. The very night that the original witness gets home, he gets a call from this grumpy general. And he says, I want to see you. So the next morning, he has to go to the base and he's interrogated in this interrogation room. He's forced to sign non-disclosure agreement papers. And then as he's leaving and being escorted away by some military personnel, he sees two MPs with what look like very thick potato sacks over their shoulders. One of these guys trips and he falls, and he notices that when this potato sack falls to the ground, he said it looked like there were human body parts within these potato sacks. Now, he wasn't sure, but he said that they resembled human body parts. Whatever that means, I don't know if it was associated with this craft, but that's what he said, that they look like human body parts. Now, why is this important? Because Great Falls Air Force Base, where this took place, is now Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is their center of a huge incident that took place in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where we had at least 10 nuclear ICBM silos that went offline and were disabled. The same thing happened in the former Soviet Union. So this is Great Falls Tribune, September 28th, 2010. Ex-Air Force officers discuss UFO sightings. Here you see Robert Salas. And bottom line is, a couple of weeks after this happened, Boeing engineers came in and they examined all the electronics within the launch control room, and they could find absolutely nothing wrong with these electronic computers whatsoever. So whoever or whatever was involved, it was intentional. There was intent to this. This was a warning, a shot over the bow. But bottom line is, this was intentional, no doubt about it. This is Rudy Strong. That gives you an idea of what this may have looked like back in 67, this incursion here. Same thing also happened in Argentina, Brazil area. 1954, we had similar cigar-shaped craft with craft coming out of the bottom and then belching smoke and fire out of the back end of these as well. So it wasn't completely an isolated incident. And this is the full color rendering of what that may have looked like. We'll go to the next one here. Camp Polk, Louisiana. Summer 1953. Herman Johnson is the primary eyewitness. He was a private in the Army. Case A1, it's this page 80. He saw the entire operation from beginning to end, and what he described is an egg-shaped craft about 30 feet across. It had a fin that wrapped around the outer portion of the craft itself. He was present when military medical personnel were helping 3 ETs vacate the craft through a hatchway. So we have medical personnel helping these ETs come out. Now, they also said that one ET was carried out on a stretcher. These things were 3.5 to 4 feet tall. one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had mittens on. They had helmets on. Oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. And the one that was being carried away, these other three were trying to establish communication with their fallen comrade. That's what it appeared to be. Now, in the report, it also mentioned that these beings did not have knee joints. So they were walking with this very odd stair stagger type step. They had no knee joints. They could only bend at their hip joints. So let's go to the next slide. This is by Joseph Wright. Gives you an idea of what this may have looked like if we were there at the time. And I'm going to blow this up, showing you the MPs, the military medical personnel, helping these ETs come out of this entryway, hatchway, all wearing this full one-piece tight-fitting flight suits and mittens, according to the report. We'll do a little bit of a blow-up here. We've zoomed out just a little bit, and now we see one of the ETs being carried off into the ambulance truck. And if we blow this up a little bit further here, we see one of the fallen comrades within this blow-up view on its way to the ambulance truck. All right, next one, Wright Patterson Air Force Base, 1953. Michael Olvey is the primary eyewitness. He was Army Reserve's warrant officer. Page 15, abstract number 8 in the book, UFO Crash Retrieval. So again, if anyone wants to follow along, that's where I'm getting this information here. Now, he was at the right place at the right time when this DC-7 four-engine cargo transport aircraft taxis up onto the tarmac, and this is hangar complex number 4. I believe it happened within this hangar off to the upper right. And that's the photograph. I've actually been in this hangar. It may have happened in this hangar. I'm not so sure, but it may have been this hangar. I'll go to the next slide, and now you can kind of see this is a DC-7 four-engine cargo transport, pulls up to the tarmac. Now, we want to picture this scene actually taking place in the hangar, because once it taxied up onto the tarmac, it went right inside the hangar. Hangar bay doors close, and on the aft port section of the DC-7, there's these cargo bay doors that open up, and then there was a forklift offloading these wooden crates. So he's watching this whole operation inside the hangar, and he's within about, I'd say, 10 feet away. He looks over, and I'm going to go to the next slide. He's looking inside these wooden crates because he's close by, and what does he see? He sees 3 ET bodies, all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. They were being suspended off the bottom of the wooden crates by a white-colored netting that protected them from the dry ice freezer burn below. And he's watching all of this. He can't believe this. Now, off into the background, there were crates that were already offloaded, and this included debris from the crash retrieval operation. So if we take everything we got from the actual primary eyewitness that Leonard interviewed, we link that up with this detailed sketch by Rudy Gardea. Now we've got the full color rendering by Joseph Wright that gives you a real good idea of what this thing looked like. Now, one interesting aspect of this case that's stressed within this report from the primary eyewitness, he said that one of these ET bodies, which was deceased, it had breasts, so we believe it was a female. It's mentioned in the report, and I want to mention it here, so I'm going to do a 90-degree look-down view, and now you can get a better idea of what these ET bodies look like with this white netting directly below them that's protecting them from the freezer bar. All right, next one, Walker Air Force Base in New Mexico, April 12th, 1954. This is 1954 to 1955 is when he served within the Air Force, and this is page 82 in the book. This is a young guy. He was only 18 years of age at the time. However, he was an expert in cameras, photography, lighting, exposures. This guy was really good. And so he thought, my skills might be helpful to the United States Air Force. So he's now in the Air Force. And one day he gets a urgent call to board a helicopter, an H-19 helicopter that's waiting for him and his team members on the tarmac. Once they board this helicopter, over the PA address system, The pilot says, "Men, this is not a drill. This is a red alert scramble." So whatever this was the real deal. So they pile into this thing, they take off, they head northbound. The freeway is off to their right. They make a left-hand turn 45 degrees. Now they're heading northwest toward Corona. It's starting to get a little bit dark. And when they go over this rise, they see this 50-foot diameter disc-shaped craft came in at about a 40-degree angle. He's hovering over this thing, not too far, maybe 30 feet above this thing. They've got a spotlight shining down on this. And then he opens up the right-hand door and is now taking photographs of this entire operation. From his vantage point, he could see 4 ET bodies deceased laying near the craft. Now, a few minutes later, they kind of land off to the right. They land the helicopter. He gets out. 2 things are immediately apparent to the primary eyewitness. Number one, the entire vicinity of this localized area smelled like automobile battery acid. The whole place smelled like battery acid. Number 2, he said that there were vehicles approaching this craft where it came down. This was the contingent of military vehicles associated with the retrieval operation. So by the time he landed and saw all this, this whole operation was absolutely in full swing. Now, he also mentioned that he was told that there was another 2 ET bodies found inside this craft for a grand total of 6 ET bodies in total here. So this is a major retrieval operation. This is Joel Christopher's Payne's illustration of what this may have looked like if we were there back in New Mexico in 1954. I also want to mention that these lights were rotating and were still rotating when they got there. And we'll go to the next one here. This is spring 1955, Texas-Mexican border, the other Roswell, written by Noe and my good friend Ruben. They get the credit for this. So this is spring 1955, near Langtree, Texas. And I'm going to set this up. There were 4 B-47s heading westbound over Texas. They were escorted by 16 F-86 Sabre jets. And I'm going to go one slide back here. This disc-shaped craft comes screaming past their flight path, and one of these F-86s peeled away, and there were sparks coming off the back end of this disc-shaped craft. He followed this thing as it kind of went into this debris field and came to a rest. And so he did a low pass, saw the entire operation. It landed just south of the Rio Grande River on the Mexican side. I'm going to go forward here. Where you see this Langtree and Eagle's Nest pushpin, that's where this thing came down. And just south of the Rio Grande River, there's a little bit of a wash here. We can narrow this down within plus or minus 200 feet. We know exactly where this thing came down. So once he peels off and makes a left-hand turn, he now flies over to Carswell Air Force Base and lands, gets out of the jet, jumps in his car. He drives to Corsicana Municipal Airport, where you see this sign here. He's met with a friend, and they both hop in a 2-seat tandem high-wing tail dragger Aranca and go fly back to the crash site before it got dark. So it was still light out, but when they got there, it was just beginning to get dark. And when he landed, this is what he said he saw. This is from the Air Force pilot. A craft that was about 25 feet in diameter, 5 feet tall. It had a dome on top that popped off and was further downfield. When this thing came in, it didn't really auger in, but kind of roughed its way in, and it left a debris trail, and the Mexican military got there before anyone. There were about 100 Mexican soldiers at this facility. Now, as the night wore on, it started getting dark out, it started getting colder, and this is a very interesting piece of evidence, you could call it. The Mexican military started going over to the 6x6 troop transport, and they were pulling out blankets, and they were laying the blankets down on the debris that was still hot at the time. And once it warmed up the blankets, they pulled these off the debris and put them on their bodies to heat their bodies up and keep them warm, which I thought was very interesting. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to kind of take you inside the hull breach. And this is from the primary eyewitness, Air Force pilot Robert Willingham. He said, quote, "The arms look like broomsticks." And this is kind of something that we've heard before, like these ET bodies, they have white skin, ashen gray white skin They're squiggly. They look like Casper the Ghost. They have arms that look like broomsticks. This is similar to what we've heard before. So let me go to Joel Christopher Payne's full color rendering, and now you can see the dome popped off further downfield. You've got the Mexican soldiers. You've got the Aranca up front, and off to the upper left, you've got the 6x6 troop transport. So what I want to do now is do a blow up to take you inside the whole breach of the craft and show you these sort of gruesome, mangled, burnt up bodies here. This is what he said, that this was not for the faint of heart. They were burnt, they were mangled, they were dismembered. It was a gruesome scene. But this is what he's telling us from this Air Force pilot here. All right, next one. Wright Patterson Air Force Base, 1955. Mrs. G, she worked in the Foreign Materials Division. This is from Charles Wilhelm, and this is page 17 in the book. So she worked in this Foreign Materials Division, something that looked like this, a huge warehouse at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. And you can see all these crates with different things stacked up here. I'm going to go to building 258. So this is warehouse building 258. Something similar to this is where this primary eyewitness worked. Now, what she said is nothing short of staggering. She said that she cataloged 1,000 components that came in from the interior of a crashed UFO, which is absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. So when we hear from the United States government that they don't have any physical evidence, it's their word against this woman's word, really. That's this thing we're going up at. 1,000 pieces that came from the interior of a UFO crash retrieval. So I said, Rudy, give me a drawing that has all this ET debris and crash and components, and I want you to populate all this shelves. And then she said, basically what they had set this thing up with is they had an assembly line all set up. When the debris came in, there was one station where a military personnel, he photographed the debris, and then it moved to the next station where they bagged it and tagged it. And then it went to the primary source, Mrs. G, and she cataloged it. And this took place over 1,000 pieces. While all this is going on, there was a mobile dolly that rolled on through, and she said that she could see 2 ET bodies that were being preserved in a formaldehyde preservation fluid as this thing is just rolling by her. So not only did she get to see the debris and catalog the debris, but she saw 2 ET bodies as well. Now, we got to her just in time, and basically 6 months prior to her passing, she mentioned this. Uncle Sam can't do anything to me once I'm in my grave. 6 months later, she's dead. So she's an American patriot. She's a hero. I do not think this woman is lying to us. So they do have the physical evidence. The question is, can senators and congressmen, do they have the correct security clearances to get to it? It doesn't appear they do. So here's the full color rendering by Joel Christopher Payne, shows you what this may have looked like. And here you can see our primary source is kind of in the midsection off to the left. They're photographing all this material hardware. So this is what this primary eyewitness is telling us here. So what's the actionable item here? Since over 1,000 components of physical ET hardware exists, this evidence should be tracked down by senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances and should be presented in open public congressional hearings. That's what should have happened last year in July when they had the hearings. They should have brought out this physical hardware, because here we are, we're almost a year later now, and we're not any closer now than we were a year ago. And more witnesses are dying off. That's why it's so important that we get to this information now for sure. Okay, let's go to the next one here. Source, retired Air Force pilot, late 1950s. Now, this was an interview that was conducted by a man named Ed Camarat Jr., and his witness saw a 5 to 6 minute black and white film clip. This film clip depicted a 60-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. The upper crew compartment had a 10-foot wide gash on it, but when they looked at the motion picture film reel, it showed you the interior. And then this whole thing cut to another scene showing you display panels. Within the craft, it had iconology not only on the inside walls, but on these display panels. And then it cut to another scene where it showed ET bodies being covered with blankets laying next to the craft. And this is all within this late 1950s time frame. Here's the blow up that shows you what the instrument panels may have looked like if we could see this back at the time frame. All right, next one. This one's important. Wright Patterson Air Force Base, 1962. This was a group of pilots that were transient. They were fighter pilots from the 350th, 54th Tactical Air Command Fighter Wing. Back in 1962, this is page 88 in the book, case A6. So the primary eyewitness is jogging with his other fellow fighter pilots. They're going down the row of hangars, and one of the hangars had its doors open. So these guys are looking for this mobile racquetball court to complete their racquetball court so they can keep their physical education going. So they run into this hangar thinking they're going to find something else, and they were shocked to see this 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It looked like a track and field discus. It was being propped up by 2 engine test stands. There were posts with a rope wrapped around the outer circumference of this thing, and they were challenged by one of these guards. And I'm going to go to what was said here. It says, the guard challenged by saying, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, sir." I replied to the affirmative, and we turned about face and departed, mumbling to ourselves that the good old U.S. had developed or had all along flying saucers in service. I do not think these fighter pilots are lying to us. They were at the right place at the right time. They ran into this by accident. They weren't expecting to see this. And when you have military pilots telling us that they're seeing these things, these are reliable witnesses that I think we can take to the bank here. I think we got time for one more here. This is December 1963, Cherry Point, North Carolina. This is a U.S. Marine. We know his name. His name is Roy Baker. UFO crash retrievals, page 152 in the book. This is case A2, case 2. This is the map that shows you where Cherry Point is. So he was told to board a plane with blacked out windows, and they flew 3 hours on this plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina. And when they landed, he was brought into a large hangar. And what did he see when the hangar doors were open? He saw a 40-foot diameter dish-shaped craft, 15 feet tall. It looked like a fat hamburger, highly polished, mirror reflective, no visible seams, essentially. There was no visible means of propulsion. There was no socket head cap screws. There were no socket hex head cap screws, no rivets. It had 9 elliptically shaped windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. They were all opaque, so you couldn't see through them. They were not visible. Now, he said that this craft did have the absolute faintest hint of seams, where you couldn't even put a razor blade. It looked like they were fully integrated that we talked about before. And then he said that there were teams of white lab coat technicians, and these red dots are the attempted point of entry that you were using with a diamond tip drill bit. So this is the second time we've heard this. Now I'm going to go to the next slide. This is Joseph Ray's illustration that shows you what this may have looked like if we were actually there. And I'm going to talk about the 3 ways they tried to get in. Number 1, diamond tip drill bits. That failed. Number 2, acetylene torch. That failed. Number 3, they brought in a laser, and that failed as well. This is the original sketch by Roy Baker, U.S. Marine. This is an original sketch. I'm going to break this down. Now, if you look on the upper left, upper right, you see these lights shining down. He said this whole thing was excruciatingly well lit. Now, the whole craft was being propped up by aircraft scaffolding about 5 feet from the floor. And if you look at the pads, these dark sections, those are the pads that are supporting this craft on the scaffolding. Now, if you look on the second to the left window, there's a little bit of a dot. That is the dot that they were trying to get in with the diamond tip drill bit. So it's really a historic drawing, original sketch from the actual Marine. A little bit more of a refined drawing. Now, he said that there was a 1-inch lip from the outer exterior of the craft itself to the outer exterior of these opaque windows, a definitive lip that you could feel with your finger. That was something he reported. Now, this is my somewhat cleaned up and refined AutoCAD drawing. And then if you look on the upper section here, I've done a blow-up enlargement that shows you what this lip looked like. Now, I want to mention a couple things here. Again, no rivets, no seams, essentially. Directly below this craft, there was a white circle painted on the floor, and his job was to guard this craft for a period of 2 weeks. This is December 1963, literally a couple of weeks after Kennedy was assassinated back on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Let's move on to the next one here. Here you see Joseph Wright's full color rendering of what this may have looked like if we were there. And then this is illustration by John McNeil. So again, you can see this white painted floor, and then you see this heavy gauge cable where they were shining a laser on this craft, and we're going to talk about what happened here. So what I want to do now is I want to take you on a tour inside this hangar as though that we're a fly on the wall. We've penetrated this chain link fence, and we're going to go into this hangar, and we're going to see what we can find here. This is what it looks like if we go through the hangar, and we're going to get a little bit closer here. And now we're totally in the hangar. You can see the white painted section on the floor here. We've got the 45-degree look-down angle from the lights. We've got military personnel. There's a couple of CIA types that are there. And we're going to blow this up a little bit closer. Now you can see these opaque windows. They're coming into view. We've got CIA types here. Next slide. You can kind of see here some of the seams are just barely visible at this point. The lab coat technicians. And now this is a 45-degree look-down angle. And now you can see this white painted circle. So bottom line is, he was told to shoot to kill anyone who breached that white painted circle. I mean, these guys weren't playing around. This is like the real deal here. Now, on the last day he was there, because he was guarding this thing for 2 weeks, he said it was being picked off of its scaffolding, and they had built a cradle on an 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy truck. It was being lowered onto this cradle, and then they were building this netting section where they could drape tarps over this thing. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So now you can kind of see this structure device where they're using the tarps over it. It's about 50% tight tarped in this illustration. I'm going to go one more. And now you can see they're fully tarped, and they're getting ready to move this thing to the next location. So two of the ways that they keep this under wraps is, number one, this is compartmentalized, so no one person knows the whole thing. And number two is they move these assets from one place to the next, and that's how they're able to keep this stuff secret for so long. This is one of the original drawings by Rudy to give people an idea of what this may have looked like if we were there during this operation. And then here's this laser operation. So once they failed with the diamond tip drill bits, and they brought in the acetylene cutting torches, and when those failed, there were two 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy trucks that pulled up next to this hangar. And then they strung these heavy gauge cables to where this thing was being propped up on the scaffolding. They brought in this laser. They did have lasers back in 63. When they turned this laser on, it reflected off the craft and bounced up and hit a ceiling tile and damaged the ceiling tile. This is according to the primary eyewitness here. And this incident with the ceiling tile here. I'm going to go to the next slide. Here's the original drawing that depicts this incident. And we'll go to the next one here. Now, the primary eyewitness said that while he was there, there were multiple teams of lab coat technicians that had color-coded badges on. So they were all wearing these color-coded badges. So if you had a green badge, you could go over here, but you couldn't go over here. If you had a yellow badge, you had access to this part, but you didn't have access to this part. If you had a red badge, you had access to the entire facility. And that's something that pops up again and again. So when you look at these cases, there's this common denominator that keeps popping up, which actually confirms the cases because they're separated by time and space. And these primary eyewitnesses didn't know each other. They're talking about the same thing here. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, while he was there, nobody checked him for anything. So he was left alone one time in this hangar, and he brought in a small Minox camera, and he took a photograph of this thing up on the scaffolding. However, this photograph was lost in a flood back in 1983. So we were this close to getting some good evidence. And here's what he said, quote, "Someday I will tell this story, and by God, people are going to believe me. But back in 1983, the photograph was lost in a flood. So I told my friend Joseph Wright, Can you do a replica of what this photograph may have looked like with this Minox camera? So it would be dirty, it would be grainy, slightly out of focus, slightly brown tones. And this is what we came up with. To the best of our ability, something like this would have been taken. And it could still be here today if it wasn't for that flood. So again, we were this close to getting this evidence. Now, I also want to mention this gentleman here. The primary eyewitness said that the Secretary of the Navy almost got shot when he was just about ready to breach that white painted circle on the floor. And it would have been this guy, Paul Nitz, United States Secretary of the Navy between 1963 and 1967. The timeline checks out. So it may have been this guy right here. Now, I want to go on to 4-star Major General Melvin F. McNichol. He was base commander at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. He's a real guy. This is his obituary. Daily Oklahoma, July 11th, 1986, says ex-Tinker Commander Melvin McNichol dies. Now, he was friends with Charlotte Mann, who was involved in the Cape Girardeau 1941 crash retrieval, because she actually held the photograph and saw the photograph of one of the ET bodies that was recovered. And these two were friends for years. They had this common interest in UFOs. And so Charlotte turns to the general and says, General, we've been friends for years. Can you tell me something that you know about UFOs? Are we still friends? Or we've got this mutual interest. Is there something you can tell me? This general turns to Charlotte and says, Charlotte, if you ever repeat what I'm about to say, I'll deny it and it could end my career. He proceeds to tell her 3 things. Number 1, he saw a UFO which was located in the West. That's the first thing. That tracks with the Marine who said that he boarded a plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina, and flew 3 hours by plane. That puts you within the West. So that checks out. And then he told her that he walked around a UFO that was on a catwalk, which was propped up by scaffolding. This is exactly what the Marine said, that he was guarding a UFO that was propped up by scaffolding, and they had a catwalk that was built around this thing. And then he told her that bodies were recovered and one was still alive. Over water cooler talk, this Marine heard these white lab coat technicians talking about bodies being recovered and one was still alive. And when I heard that from Charlotte Mann 6 years ago at IUFOC in Arizona, I said, I got it now. Because this general described exactly what this Marine was talking about. And I know for certain that these two didn't know each other. Completely different people altogether. They described virtually the identical situation, identical craft, basically, the propped up by the scaffolding, the catwalk, the mention of the West, and the bodies. So when you put this all together, I believe we actually had a real case. This is something we can land our hat on. This is something that we can take to the bank, because these witnesses are not lying to each other. They don't even know each other. They're describing the same thing. So in this presentation, what I've tried to do here is just give a brief overview of some of these crash retrieval cases that are coming from reliable firsthand military witnesses. And the goal of this presentation is just to make these cases come alive through the use of basically illustrations, sketches, drawing, to preserve an important part of our national history. And I'll exit out of the slides here and I'll stop share. And now we're back here. So, yep.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They have a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.